Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hostler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a guest today again. So I brought Dr. Ryan back today for this episode, and I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. I think it's really helpful to have Ryan's perspective on things. He always adds a couple of really helpful tidbits and things, and I also think it's helpful for me personally because sometimes I get on tangents, and he is really good at reminding me to explain things. So you can thank him if you get more out of the podcast when he's on here. So say hi, Ryan.
Hey, yeah, I'll hopefully keep her on track, and we'll make things make sense today.
Ollie is obviously here as well. Anytime Ryan's here with me, that means the whole fam's here. So you get a whole family podcast for Movement Upgraded today. But the reason that I particularly wanted Ryan to come on this podcast is because we're going to go in depth a little bit about something that I promised on social media. I promised on Instagram that I would talk about this. We just are finally getting to it, and I think because it's more of a detailed conversation, I want to make sure that we are doing it justice, essentially. And so that's why I wanted to bring Ryan on. But today we're going to talk about why I decided on my Instagram stories to talk about Squat University, essentially. So I'm going to start off this whole conversation by saying I do not want to be another content creator or professional who beats other professionals down. That's not what I'm here to do. I think we do that so much in the movement world. It actually, for a very long time, made me not want to create content because there's just constant arguing. And I feel like I heard this concept a while back, and I can't stop thinking about it because it's so perfect, but they call it like dick slinging in the movement world. But it's just like
that's a new one for me. I've never heard that.
I heard it and I was like, that's so true. It's just like everybody's egos kind of wanting to be correct, and I've fallen prey to that as well when I first was learning movement stuff. But I don't want to partake in that, right? Like I'm not here to do that. I don't want to tear down anybody in the movement world. I think that especially the bigger accounts like Squat University, right? I may not agree with everything every other person in the industry says or does. And I definitely benefit also from those people doing the work that they've done. So there are a ton of other movement providers that I may not subscribe to all of the things that they preach about, like Gray Cook or Kelly Starrett, right? But they have done such a massive amount of work and have helped our entire profession. And I have no idea the quote, but there is some quote out there that talks about how we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And in any profession, that's definitely true. So those people paved the way. Like Gray Cook was one of my first people that I took I read his book and I took courses from, and really kind of helped me dive into the movement world. So I can't sit here and say that I disagree with everything that they say, right? Like that's not helpful. Same with Squat University. They're doing a really good job at getting people to realize that movement's important and mobility is important, and they're spreading a lot of good information. Squat University specifically does a really good job at educating the public. They are a very big account, and I do think probably most of what he posts is very relatable and helpful in getting people to realize that your diagnosis doesn't have to be this identity you wear for the rest of your life that holds you back from things. And I think that message is really important, and it definitely paved the way for me being able to say my message, which is very similar. So I want to start with saying that, like, I'm not here to tear that person down. And I also don't want you to think that I don't think that I need to do that to make you think that I know more than Squat University, because I'm sure that is not true. I just think everybody knows different things. And what I do want to accomplish with this podcast is help you understand, first and foremost, why I said that the particular post that they had shared is problematic. I'm going to break that down a little bit and give you just an example on why I don't love all of the things that is shared from that account specifically. But I really want to kind of pull back a little bit from that specific account and just give you some helpful tips, 3 of them specifically today, in consuming movement content. Something that you can kind of pull from and start to utilize these tips and this information when you're consuming content, so that you can tell when something aligns with what you're looking for or not. And that's my goal, right? That's my goal today, is just education. And I'm going to do that by telling the story about Squat University and the post that he shared specifically that triggered all of this. And because of the responses that I had and people really wanting to learn more is why I'm creating the podcast. I think it's a perfect opportunity to learn and educate, and I am by no means an expert that I know everything. So I just want to put that out there, like, yeah. So with that being said, let's give the background story about what triggered all of this. And there are a handful of posts that I don't love that I see. I don't follow a Squat University, but a lot of people that I know or that I follow will share his things. And
they'll send it right to your inbox just so you can get a response, or they can get a response from you.
And sometimes that does happen too. And
what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think people like inflammatory things. They like want everybody to get angry or upset. And I just, for the most part, like, I
try to find the middle ground with everything.
Yes, I don't get triggered anymore. I've done some work on that. It was not easy. But really what my response is when people share things is, is there a potential for some education here? And that's what this is. That's what the last post is. So let's talk about the post. So the post that was shared was specifically about Jefferson curls and why you should not do them and why you should do a stone.
Yeah, and I think it was an Atlas carry.
Atlas.
That's what it is. Where like in the strongman competitions where you pick up that big, heavy Atlas stone with a rounded back. And he was saying how that is a better option or movement, exercise to do, because you're maintaining a flexed spine position versus the Jefferson curl where you're moving your spine under load.
Right. I don't even know what the actual title is of the stone. Like,
it's called,
is it a stone lift? An Atlas stone?
I'm pretty sure it's just called an Atlas stone lift. I don't know though. I'm not a strong man.
Here's
obviously.
the thing. Here's something I'll just like side note about. I can't stand in the fitness industry how obsessed we are with showing what we know based off of like the names of exercises, because in the grand scheme of things, I don't give a fuck. I don't care what something is named. I really don't care. I think that's like some weird like I know more than you thing. Whatever, call it whatever you want. We just invented all of this anyway. So, but back to that post that was about Jefferson curls, which is essentially just rounding your entire spine controlled with weight, or you can do them body weighted, but they're still load of your body weight. And then standing back up segmentally. That's how they're supposed to be done. Most of the videos you see on social media are not done that way, but that's the gist or the idea behind a Jefferson curl. It's just moving your spine and then adding load to that, like we would do for any other joint. Like if we want to grow our biceps, we are going to do a bicep curl, which is moving our elbow through flexion and extension. It's very similar in the spine.
And then slowly progressing the bicep curl, so you get stronger.
Right. So
same thing with the spine.
Yeah. So that's the premise behind a Jefferson curl. And he was arguing that a Atlas stone like lift is better because you aren't rounding your spine. There is a flexion moment versus movement. I'm not going to go down that whole rabbit hole of explaining those, but in my opinion, when he was using that language, it is just using terminology that sounds really scientific and smart to kind of give you a reason to listen to him or believe him, I guess. I think that we kind of tend to do that in the movement world a lot, where we overcomplicate something and make it sound really fancy, and then we throw in words like research and then we confuse people.
The whole idea of him bringing the moment versus movement thing into the whole post though was confusing, because he literally then goes on to say that you can do a Jefferson curl, which is a movement and not that moment, but only do it with light weight. So it's like contradicting himself.
And this goes back to one of the things that I don't like about this account specifically is the contradiction that happens very often. And it's,
don't do this, but you can do it if it's lightweight. Like, wait, what?
So in his video, the biggest contradiction that you can see is just in this video, it's showing somebody with a kettlebell, which is like a smaller kettlebell for this person. They look like they probably lift pretty heavy. That's me making an assumption. I don't know for sure.
I would agree.
But he's doing a Jefferson curl, and there's a big X on it, right? That is saying, like, don't do these, right? And he's saying, don't do Jefferson curls, do these stone lifts instead. So he shows, don't do this Jefferson curl at all, even with this low weight of a kettlebell. Then in the description, in the caption, he says, by the way, it's actually okay if you load your spine, because we know, like, there is now research to show that not only does rounding your spine, is it okay with load, but actually in some ways our spines may be stronger with load. There's a little bit of evidence coming out to show us that. So he has to acknowledge that, and he does in his caption. He says, it's okay with low loads. But just don't lift really heavy, right? There's just one little sentence in all these paragraphs of that. And in my opinion, it's kind of one of those CYAs to get people to like not attack his posts.
Yeah.
But
and just taking a step back, it's like you can do any movement with low load, and you shouldn't do anything with heavy load if you're not prepared for it.
Yes. But let's just like 1 second pause. I want to finish my thought there. And Ryan's like going to the next point, which is really important. But what I wanted to say is it's contradicting. So if your video is going to show, don't do this, then that's what people see. And that's what people are getting out of his message. But then you're going to put one little disclaimer of it's okay if you're doing it with low loads. So that's contradicting, right? Those are not cohesive. A better way to do that would have been to basically not make this post, essentially, right? Like the post was, don't do Jefferson curls, do this instead. But in the caption, Jefferson curls are okay with low load. So that is one of the perfect examples of the contradiction that happens a lot on this page. So that is why I don't love accounts like Squat University.
But he had to make the post because it gets clicks and it makes him popular. We're getting to that later on, too.
We will. I will talk about the clickbait stuff in the end of the podcast. Ryan is excited. He likes talking about these. But let's talk now about the idea of it's okay to round your back if it's with low loads. So this is problematic for a couple different things. One, what is a low load? Like, how are we defining that? Like, there's no way to decide what that is. And
purely subjective.
It's purely subjective, and it also makes you be like in your head. It's kind of fear mongering because that's saying, okay, well, you can never round your back with heavy loads, which means in life you better never round your back when you're going to lift something. And that's just making you be afraid of loading your body. What we really know in the movement world and injuries is that if you are not prepared for a movement or a load, that is when you're at the highest risk. That's the most problematic. That's the only thing we really know. Everything else is kind of speculation. We don't have a ton of like research to support what movement is more optimal. And load is very relative to the person that's lifting or experiencing the load. So a general population, a low load for them may only be doing like quadruped spine segmentation. There's still load there. It's just a lot less. And some people who are in a lot of pain may need something like that, right? But somebody who's not in a lot of pain, what is low load for them? Somebody who squats and deadlifts like 300, 400 pounds, what is considered low load for them? So this doesn't give us good parameters and understanding. And the reason it doesn't is because there are none, because they're specific to the person. So a better way to educate and say this would have been really an entirely better post would have been Jefferson curls are probably fine to do because we round our backs anyways. It just needs to be something that you're prepared for. Like, end of story. There's the post. But guess what? Nobody wants to read that. It's not clickbait. How else did he get millions of followers? It's by clickbait, right? It's by telling people, hey, this is bad for you, this is good. It's very black and white, and that's not how life is. And we really need to get better at not promoting accounts that are very black and white like that. And so in the movement world, it's way easier to do this, and I'll talk about this down the road, but it's way easier to just have ideas of this is always wrong versus this is always right, right? Like, that's just so much easier than having to actually think about something and have context and nuance, which we'll talk about later. But that's a big reason that I did not like this post. It's just that, what is a low load? The second thing, was there anything that you wanted to say? Because you were kind of talking about this before. The second thing that I didn't love is the application, or not even the application, but the like, what's like a word for like real life ability to do something? I know Ryan's like always. I always ask him what's a word for something. He's like, he never knows. Just like the reality
I
of
can read her brain.
Yeah, it hasn't worked yet. It's been 12 years. I'm trying to get him to read my brain, but so far we're not there. But like the reality of applying it in real life, real life applicability.
Yeah, you said the word.
I don't even think that was the word. I'll think of it like tomorrow. But nobody has an Atlas stone sitting in their house, and like coming
Most
up with
gyms
these
don't even have an Atlas
exactly
stone.
I don't even have one in my perfect beautiful little garage gym, like okay. And I love movement. That's why I was bringing that up. It's just, why are we giving people this small amount of things that are so narrow of what they're able to do in order to keep their spines healthy and strong? Like, why are we creating these parameters that are not super evidence-based, right? Like, he throws the word research out there, but he's cherry picking information. And if you're not familiar with that term, that's just literally finding some articles. Research is complicated and hard. And if you don't actually know how to read research and disseminate information, you can find articles that like support all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people think that if we use the word research, we find a research article that shows something, it proves something, but research never proves anything. That is a big red flag. If you see somebody saying the word prove, there's no such thing. We don't have research that proves anything. All that research does is give us enough information to make generalized conclusions on things, and that is always up to interpretation and application. It doesn't always apply to everybody, and there's a lot of nuance involved in research. And cherry picking is just picking articles that support your bias or your thoughts. And when we are really looking at research, we need to look at an aggregation of multiple studies and higher quality studies that are done really well to make general big conclusions like the things that he's doing, not just pick an article and say this article shows this. And the article that he talked about was actually a very small amount of subjects from what I remember. So it's just not the best study that we can now generate information that we disseminate in an account that has a high amount of followers and high amount of influence. And when we're on social media, we have a high responsibility to make sure that we are providing information that is helpful and not harmful to the public. And things like telling people don't do this is harmful for the public. Like making people think that their backs are going to break or get injured. Even though he says that, you can say whatever you want, but the general context of that entire post was fear-mongering and making you be afraid to round your back with load. So when it comes to those types of things, it's really important that we just acknowledge the power that we have with our words. And you've never heard me say that on this podcast, but also recognize that we can't just like cherry pick information. And we have to have a better understanding of research before we start saying research shows this. So that's a little side note on one of the other reasons I don't love it, because people don't just have Atlas stones around their house to be able to do that as a lift. So like it's not realistic. That's the word I was looking for, is realistic. So that's the next thing. The last thing I wanted to bring up is one of the other things that he said is that our discs, specifically he says the annulus, does not adapt. And while we don't necessarily, from my knowledge, have research that shows that the annulus of our spines adapt, we don't have research that shows that it does not. So we cannot make these large claims without research that supports that. And his claim is that the reason it does not adapt is because it is relatively avascular, which means it doesn't have a ton of blood supply. And I'd like us to consider something real quick, because some of the newer research we have that we didn't realize before, because guess what? Research doesn't always figure things out. We just make one step forward and forward and forward, and that's what research does. And there's such small little baby steps that it's annoying. And if you're involved and ever been involved in research, you're probably nodding your head right now because it is so freaking tedious. It's insane. But we're able to change our minds as we learn more information. And in fact, a good sign of a good professional is when they do change their minds and give you updates and have these kind of nuanced conversations. And so one of the things we didn't always know or think was that ACLs, the ligament in our knee, we didn't think that those ever adapted. We thought that since they don't have blood supply, they can't get stronger. But we have newer evidence that shows that with things like kettlebell swings, I think is like one of the exercises that helped. I'm remembering like an old article that I read, actually facilitates a thicker ACL, which was shown in an MRI from what I remember, which is really freaking cool. That means that our ACL can get thicker and stronger, even though it doesn't have a ton of blood supply. So that argument that because there is not blood supply, then we don't adapt is not very valid. It's something that we used to think, and a lot of Squat University explanations and things are very archaic, and that's just the perfect example of like how that, like the perfect example of that, of an archaic understanding that has not adapted or evolved with research. So that's the first and foremost thing. The second thing is that when we think about adaptation, he's cherry picking different parts of the spine. Our spine is not just a disc. Our spine has a disc, right? The intervertebral disc. We have cartilage. We have super freaking hella thick ligaments. And I say this as somebody who has dissected them in a person who is not living, which I think they're probably I think it would be harder to go through something and somebody who is living. And I went through one of the bodies that I dissected was a frail older woman, and that was still really thick and hard to get through. So our spines are really resilient, and to think that that those ligaments can't adapt or those muscles can't adapt is just kind of silly, and picking like one part of the disc and saying that doesn't adapt, so now we have to avoid all load there, doesn't make sense. It's like picking a part in my elbow and saying my elbow cartilage does not have good blood supply, and because of that it probably is the word we should be using, probably doesn't adapt very well, because we don't have proof that it doesn't, which means I shouldn't load my elbow. I shouldn't load my elbow, but only in low loads. So guess what? Every bro in the gym, now you can no longer do full bicep curls. At full flexion, we have less, he called this in the spine myoelectric silence of the spine muscles, which just means they are not contracting via electrodes, the like electrode signal through, what's the electrode things? EMG readings, yes. So it means that there are less of those happening. And he said that happens at full flexion, right? Now, what's interesting is we know that strength and the ability to like contract something pretty hard is angle specific, and that's something I've talked about before, so you can be strong in one position, not others. So I'm wondering if the myoelectric silence is happening in people who've never trained their muscles in flexion, like they don't actually know how to contract and control those muscles in that position. We don't know that information.
But you can almost probably guarantee it, because not too many people are going through and working on controlling their spine through spine segmentation cars and things of that nature.
Because we're too afraid to round our spines, because Squat University says it's not a good idea. This is why it's problematic.
I mean, you can even look at his like cat cow in the video too, and
he doesn't have control.
He has like no lumbar flexion and no control of his lumbar spine at all. It's like only his thoracic spine that moves.
And I will say this, like this is not us tearing him down, and you don't need to have perfect movement. I don't have perfect movement. There's things that I can, nitpick about my own things, but I will tell you that about my body. And I will tell you when I look at my own movement, I know that I lack some of that segmentation, and I'm working on it actively. And there's a difference between me knowing it's important and working on it and being able to tell you like I don't have it, versus somebody who's like, no, it's not important and also doesn't have it. Like he doesn't train it. So that is kind of
if you don't train it, you can't expect to have good electrical signals
yes.
in your EMG studies.
And so back to what I was saying, if we're going to take that information and apply it to an elbow, now we can no longer fully flex the elbow because it puts more load on the ligament, and the ligament's avascular. And so now we have to do very partial elbow curls and at low loads only. Body weight even is best, right? So does that make sense? It makes absolutely no sense, right? Like nobody would listen to that in the gym. But when it comes to the spine,
it makes so much sense to people.
It's because we're so afraid of our spines. And I think that is a very long problem that's like probably many layers to unpack. But I feel like a lot of it has to do with the fact that our spine is like very central, right? Like our spinal cord, there is a higher risk to injuring our spines than our elbows. Like we'll be fine even if we have our whole arm chopped off. But if we lose our spine and sever it, like we become paralyzed or can die. I understand. This is not me fear-mongering you either. Please don't get stressed. This doesn't mean that we should be thinking that automatically loading our spine means that we will jump right into the most severe of cases. We really need to understand and see how strong our spines are. And I know that because I dissect it. I've worked through people's spines and I know how they are. But when I was going through my own back issues, I was constantly told my back is fragile. I shouldn't load it, especially because it's crooked. It's like, no, my spine is still spine. It's just a little crooked. Like, so what? Everybody's spine is a little crooked, to be honest. And maybe that just means I need to pay more extra attention to my spine and actually work on it a little bit more, which is actually what happened. But that's just kind of what I want us to be thinking about is we create these arbitrary rules about the spine and we treat it very differently, even though it's not that special. Like, it's not. So I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover on why I don't love Squat University and why I didn't love that post specifically.
And to like build upon the annulus argument that he proposes that it doesn't adapt, I'll be honest and upfront, like I don't know what the research says right now. I'd have to like actually go and do a very research. Deep dive, yes. Yeah, but those who have disc herniations, the disc heals.
Yes, it does.
So it adapts after it's injured. So why can't it adapt before it becomes herniated? Or
even after. Why can't it adapt more after? Why does the adaptation stop when we've decided it's healed, quote unquote? And these are like, when you really think about these things and you try to define them and create like actual parameters, then you're like, well, if we can't do that, then how are we saying these things? And that's what I want to get at. And by the way, if you're like a normal non-movement provider person listening to this, some of this may be like kind of over your head. Hopefully you're kind of grasping some of the information though. Like, and if you're not, we're going to move into 3 things for you to pay attention to that might help you kind of critically think about this. But I think you're smart enough to understand what we're saying. That's why we're talking about it. And I think you're smart enough to have deeper thoughts about these things. And I think that we as people with any sort of influence in social media, and that's a power that we hold. And I think that treating people like they are capable of that is very important. You are very capable of reading and going through information that we provide. Now, I'm not the best at breaking information down into bite-sized pieces, and that is personally something I'm working on. I like almost overcorrect compared to somebody like Squat University who's like, I'm just going to give you the answer. And that's what we want. So before I go down that path, because it's kind of what we're talking about, I think that was everything that we wanted to talk specifically about the Squat University post. I think Ryan helped add some information about that because I knew I would forget some things here and there. But
you crushed it.
Yeah, thank you. But those are the main glaring things of why I didn't love that. And these are types of things that also are very similar in other posts that he shared. Like, I couldn't tell you because I have not gone down and I'm not going to spend tons and tons and tons of hours to do all of this research and be able to present every detail with you unless I feel like it's super helpful and beneficial, and I can do that over time. But hopefully this gave you some context and some good information as to why we should maybe critically think a little bit more about the content we're consuming. So that moves me into the main point of the podcast, which is to go through the 3 tips for you as a consumer taking in movement related content, just things for you to keep in mind. And so the first thing is going to be something that applies all across the board, no matter what industry you're in. And that is that more followers doesn't mean more credibility. And I know in the social media world, it feels like it does. Like it feels like they know things. It feels like they're on their shit. You see them. They build a high level of trust with you. It's a very interesting world we live in. And sometimes it's like, well, how can it not mean credibility? Because a lot of those people are really good at social media. They're good at showing you things, at making you feel like you know something after you leave consuming their content. So like after that post that we were explaining, you probably left saying, yes, Jefferson curls are bad. We need to not do them. And Atlas stones are better. And flexion moments versus movements are better. And like you feel like you know something, but you actually are just repeating information you've been told, and it's not like you actually understand what's happening. And those people who have a lot of followers on social media are the people who are really good at that with social media. They also will be really good at curating testimonials or information that makes you feel like they know a lot about what they're doing. And also, they may be like Squat University may be a good physical therapist in person, but the types of content that is shared doesn't necessarily always portray that. And so that's just kind of something that I want us to keep in mind, is just that try not to automatically assume or jump into they are an expert because they have tons of followers. I know that it's like hard, but just like pay attention to that, right? Like as you're consuming content next time, just pay attention to who you think deserves like a lot of respect, or who you like are like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this person knows everything. Just pay attention to that, and know that a lot of followers has more to do with how good they are at the game of social media and
posting controversial
than anything else. If you
post just like this one, because it got a lot of engagement.
Yes, if you are good at black and white thinking and like post something that's really polarizing, for sure you're gonna get a lot of engagement. And is that really helping anybody? I don't know. It's helping you grow more followers, which might be more money in your pocket. I have no idea. Or just makes you feel better because you have more followers, which happens. So more followers does not mean credibility. Just probably means they're good at social media. That's tip number 1.
Number 2.
Tip number 2 is going to be context is queen. So this is really important to understand. And this goes back to the polarizing posts and black and white thinking and good versus bad. Social media, it allows for very small snippets of information. Very small, right? And I feel like when I make posts or have made posts in the past, I constantly was running out of space. I am a wordy person. Are we surprised?
Because nuance is everything for you. But it's good.
I'm like, what is every single angle we could think about for something? But I'm very detail oriented and very nuanced, to the point of my own detriment, where sometimes I don't make social media posts because of it. But like I said, I swung so far to the opposite end of the pendulum because I'm tired of seeing things like what we are experiencing here, which is why this podcast exists. Actually, this podcast exists because I could not capture all of the nuance in my captions, and I was like, screw Instagram posts, I'll continue to make them and be like more try to be like less wordy, and I'll just like put all of my words into a podcast where you can listen to me rant. Yeah. So, but context really is queen, and understanding that like the nuance and the context matter the most. The more certain an account or a person is that you follow are about something, the less likely they're actually providing evidence-based information. Which is hard. There's just not a lot of absolutes when it comes to movement, rehab, performance, all of those things. There are going to be some absolutes, like sleep 100% affects your risk for injury and pain in general. Like that is like an absolute. We know that. How much we can get away with, that's where the nuance is like different. So the application of information really changes. And there are people who will also talk about exercise selection, which is like what we just talked about. And they'll be like, a hip thrust is not a real lift, right? Or it's not even helpful. Like a hip thrust is just stupid. It's just a waste of time. If you want to train your glutes, do this exercise, blah, blah, blah. The thing about this is there are a good amount of population, people that I work with for the most part, who can't do heavy squats or heavy lunges because they have pain or issues, but we can load up a heavy hip thrust and they can do it and it feels great. Do you know how empowering that is to help somebody be able to continue lifting or be able to lift heavy when they can't do the regular traditional lifts? It's fucking awesome. I know, because I was that person. I trained like a heavy hip thrust for a long time before, while I worked on all the other shit that I had to do to get myself to be able to squat heavy. And I'm back to back squatting this year for the first time ever, because I never liked back squatting. It didn't feel good for my body. But I was still able to get strong and train and build muscle that way. So this just goes back to everybody as an individual has their own set of factors that change what they're prepared for, what their goals are, what is ideal for them. And as a person who helps people on an individual basis, those things really matter and they change what is important. And while social media can't capture the nuance, I don't think that means we need to give up on it altogether. I think that means we need to be smarter about how we educate. And I think we can do a little bit better job than what Squat University tends to do. I am always working on getting better at that. And I will tell you that I'm not 100% either, but I'm working on it. And I would like to see other bigger accounts like Squat University, like who else? Move You. I can't stand that account either. Those accounts, like I would like to see them do a little bit better. But why would they spend more time on that when it doesn't get them as much interaction or engagement? It's not as much clickbait. So you want to find people who are going to be able to help you think critically. Your brain does not want to think critically. We see this in everything, politics, like every single thing, in health and nutrition. Like we love to like argue things, and we would rather think everything is black and white, and we would rather just commit to an idea than to actually think of all of the contextual factors that change and all of the gray area that exists in the world. And I live in the gray area. Like, gray is a great color. I invite you to join me. I hope that the creators and the people that you follow in social media, that's what they should be doing too, is inviting you to join them in the gray area where the world needs to live. And your brain doesn't want to do that, by the way. That's why I brought that up. And we actually, I forget where I read this, but in a book I read talking about how hard it is for our brains to hold multiple truths at once. It is really hard for us to hold multiple ideas and think that they can coexist. It's way easier to just think, nope, this is the way it is. This is my perspective and that's the way it is. So much easier, but life is much better. You'll have better relationships with people. You'll realize how much more colorful the world is. Ironically, you'll see the world in more colors if you join the gray area. It's funny how that works. But I think that what I want you to get out of this is to make sure that the accounts you're following are inviting you to think and inviting you and saying a lot of "it depends," right? That's a good sign. That's like a green flag sign of them saying, "It depends. I would need to know more," or responding to your question with more questions, needing to get more specific rather than giving you blanket statements. Mm-hmm. Blanket statements are kind of a red flag, right? There's a blanket statement that I can usually make for most people, which is like, do more cars. It's never going to hurt, because it really doesn't. So there are some things that can be blanket statements, but they're going to be very generalized, right? And there's still nuance to that, right? Because I'll still say do your cars, but only in paved free ranges of motion.
Yep,
so
I was going to add that. We covered it.
Yeah, there's always context and nuance that matters. So make sure that the accounts you follow are not sitting there saying absolutes, like rounding the spine is always bad.
Yeah, I don't know if it's 100% an absolute, but the only other thing on top of the sleep and poor recovery that leads to injury is doing something that you're not prepared for. If the load you placed on your body is greater than the tissue's ability to dissipate that load or handle that load, you're at a higher risk of injuring yourself. Is it 100% absolute? No, but the risk is definitely higher. So make sure you're prepared for the stuff that you're doing.
I feel like that's most of what we do.
Slow progression.
Yeah, that's everything I do is to help people facilitate a level of preparedness for what their goal is. So if your goal is just to live life, I'm trying to help you find the level of preparedness you need in your joints and your tissues for the general loads that life throws upon you. Now, remember that life is variable. There are always random things, but we can't predict it, which is why we talk about mitigating injuries with different things. We don't talk about preventing them. But if you have a goal, a plan, if there's some controlled environment you're going to be in, then you need to control your preparedness as much as you can for that. And it's just, that's what load management really comes down to, and it's making sure that your tissues are prepared for the loads that are placed upon them. So yes, for sure, I'm not saying that we should go out and everybody should go Jefferson curl their body weight. Please don't do that. If you've never segmented your spine, if you've never even done a cat-cow, first of all, if you've never then taken a cat-cow and learned how to segment your spine, which is a very big leap. It sounds like the same thing, but it's really not.
Definitely not the
same
thing.
Ask any patient who's ever worked with us. Yep. I know some of you are listening and nodding your head because it's the hardest thing you've ever done, probably. But if you've never done those things, then you're not prepared for heavy weight. You haven't even done body weight. You've done like offloaded. Like quadruped is gravity is not compressing your spine, so it's actually less than body weight. It's just very low level. So keep that in mind. There's a big jump between that and heavy loaded Jefferson curls. So preparedness really matters. So context is queen. Find people who help you. Think critically. The last but not least thing that I want you to keep in mind as you're consuming information, specifically on social media, but even if it's not in the movement world, like even beyond movement, is that not everyone can know everything. And this means a couple different things. One, people on social media who are influencers, their job is to influence, right? I don't love calling myself an influencer because one, I'm really not. It's like not what I do. I educate and I'm a content creator. That's kind of what I consider myself, but whatever you want to call me, I don't really care. But influencers' job is to influence people. And because a lot of influencers are really good at their jobs, they develop a high level of trust. You see them every day. Even the people who are very transparent, they're very like, you feel like you're like, I trust them. Even the people who are like that, and then the people who are really smart. People who are smart in like one realm of science, for example. We trust them more when we are more science people. And this is true for even them. They cannot know everything. I cannot know everything. And I'm constantly reminding people, a lot of my, on social media, a lot of my clients, a lot of people I know will ask me about things and I'll be like, look, I know a little about a lot of things and I will educate you on what I do know, but I will also tell you I'm not the expert and I will send you to the expert when it's necessary. I'm very good about doing that. What I see on social media a lot is people saying, here's my experience with this thing. Like, I am not this person. Maybe I am not a physical therapist, but here's what I'm doing for my back pain. And I think this is a hard conversation because, yes, it can be helpful to share what you're doing and share your life. That's kind of like why hide it, but also we tend to trust those people for what they're doing and their experience more than an actual professional who is educating you and telling you the things that you need to know. And so when it comes to things like mobility, for example, most general physical therapists or most general personal trainers are not going to be specialized in understanding mobility. I work with people a lot who are like, come to me specifically because I help bridge the gap between mobility and fitness. Rehab and fitness, and mobility kind of is that gap, right? Not everybody can know everything. They can know a little bit about some things, but it's really important to know that when you're consuming information, that just because somebody's doing it, just because it worked for them, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It doesn't mean that it's the answer. It also doesn't mean that what they're saying is true, even if they're smart and intelligent, and even if they're in some sort of the realm of what thing it is that you are learning about from them. I also see this happen a lot with injuries and people in fitness. They'll be like, here's what I'm doing for my fitness, whatever. And people will be like, oh, that sounds really good. Tell me more. And the next thing you know, they're the expert. And all of us experts about those types of things are typically not referred to, or people will not seek us out, I should say. So you want to find the people or You want to find the people who are very knowledgeable in the things that you want to know about. You don't necessarily want to put all your eggs in one basket and just assume that your influencer is the person that you should listen to for every single thing. Yeah. So I just think we need to take advice and experiences with a grain of salt and remember that they can't know everything. And when it comes to rehab and pain too, by the way, it's so complicated that like there are reasons that certain techniques or things can work for people that they don't even realize why they're working. And the explanations are very far off very often. So that's something I see as somebody on social media, and I follow a lot of people on social media sharing their things, and sometimes I'm like, is this really helping people, or is this actually a lack of self-awareness of not helping people or maybe even causing harm? They just don't even realize that could be happening. So your job as a consumer is just to realize where you're getting information from. I think that was it.
And realizing that thing that they're doing might work for them, and it might be fine if you try it, but to realize that if you try and it doesn't work for you, it's not that there isn't a solution for you. Physical therapy is not for you. Chiropractic care is not for you. It's just that it probably wasn't the right thing for you, and that's when you need to seek a professional to actually get that professional advice.
Most like special like treatments and all these things are probably not going to be the answer for most people. Otherwise, you would probably hear about it on my podcast. The things that people need for getting out of pain and tackling injuries are very much lifestyle related. They're very much exercise and movement related. And then sometimes we do need to augment with certain other things like dietary changes, but that goes back to lifestyle changes, right? Like it kind of all boils down to lifestyle stuff. There's not some special person who can heal you most often. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work for certain people. It just means for the most, you're probably the rule, not the exception. And by the way, just a side note, some of the people that I do follow who have shared certain things about what healed their back pain or whatever, they'll share all the other stuff that they have done. And none of it is what I would recommend. They have not tried any of the stuff that I do with my patients or clients, like progressive strength training, mobility training, breath work, managing their sleep and stress. All of those things, haven't done any of them.
Like, I can confirm.
And they'll say they've gone to chiropractic work, or they'll say they've gone to physical therapy, but what they say about it is very much the typical physical therapy or chiropractic work, and it's not what is actually evidence-based. It's very archaic. So there's my little rant about that I didn't expect to go on, but those are the 3 things to keep in mind. I'll review them one more time for you. So number 1, more followers doesn't mean credibility. It just means they're probably good at social media. Number 2, context is queen. The more certain somebody is about something, the less likely they are providing evidence-based information. So find people who help you critically think, and nuance matters. And number 3, not everyone can know everything, and make sure that you are really thinking about the people that you follow on social media and where you're getting information from. So I'm going to close this out with saying that doesn't mean you can't follow people like that. I just want you to like pay attention to how you feel about the content after you like consume it. So if it makes you feel afraid to move or that you're always doing the wrong thing, then maybe that's not the best account to follow. Whatever. If you follow somebody who does share their information that you don't agree with or don't like, you don't have to do anything about it. You can just ignore it and let it go by. Like it doesn't have to mean anything. Or you can unfollow them. Like it's really up to you to protect your own boundaries, but you curate your feed on social media very much by what you engage with and who you follow. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. And I think that's everything. So if you loved this podcast, then please let us know. Send it to somebody who you think would benefit from this information. Shoot me a message or an email at jen@movementupgraded.com or on Instagram at Jen Hostler. I love hearing from you about the podcast. It's always helpful. And
if there's something in this podcast specifically that's not like really clear, let us know too. And I'm sure Jen can make a quick little like Instagram story or something, because she's always good at hopping on there and doing a quick one. If it's something,
or if there's something bigger, sometimes there are tendencies and patterns that I notice, and I'll make a podcast episode about it. So I'm happy to do that for you. So let me know. And then if you have not reviewed this podcast, please go review it if you love it. I'd love to hear I'd love to see a review from you. It's really helpful. And thank you so much if you've already done it. It really means the world to me. So with that being said, we'll catch you on the next episode.